The scent of cilantro still takes me back to my grandmother's kitchen in San Miguel. I am Raul Mendoza, and my story begins in that small village nestled between mountains and memories, where the earth was rich but opportunities were scarce. My abuela would say, "Mijo, remember who you are when the world tries to tell you different." Her calloused hands would cup my face, eyes crinkling at the corners like the pages of her worn Bible. Those words became my North Star when, at 18, I stood at our doorstep with nothing but a duffel bag containing 3 changes of clothes, my father's pocket watch, and the weight of my family's hopes. "I'll send for you," I promised Mama as she pressed her rosary into my palm, the beads worn smooth from years of prayers. Her tears fell silently, but her spine remained straight. "Make your own path, but don't forget the one that led you here." The journey north was a blur of dust, fear, and strangers' faces. I repeated my grandmother's words like a prayer through border crossings and cramped rides in the backs of trucks. When I finally arrived in Fairhaven, Nebraska, it wasn't the America of glossy magazines. No gleaming skyscrapers, no streets paved with gold, just endless cornfields swaying like a green-gold sea under an impossibly wide sky. My first home was a converted chicken coop on the Peterson farm, a far cry from the apartment I'd described in my letters home. Every muscle screamed as I learned to operate machinery I'd never seen before, my hands blistering then callousing as I harvested crops under the merciless sun. At night, I'd collapse onto my cot, too exhausted even to dream. "You work hard," Mr. Peterson would comment gruffly, his weathered face revealing nothing. It wasn't praise, just observation. In a town where immigrant was whispered like a curse, I kept my head down and my thoughts to myself. The ache in my muscles was nothing compared to the one in my chest when I'd walk through Fairhaven's single main street. Children would stare, old men would turn away, and I'd feel my otherness like a second skin I couldn't shed. At the corner store, Mrs. Wilkins would count my change twice, her lips pressed into a thin line. The local diner had a help-wanted sign perpetually in the window, but somehow they were never hiring when I inquired. 6 months in, doubt began eating at me like rust on metal. I'd sit under the stars after work, staring at the calluses ridging my palms, wondering if they would be the only legacy I'd leave behind. Each phone call home became an exercise in fiction as I described a life of progress and promise that existed only in my imagination. "You don't belong here," a teenage boy spat one day as I waited for the bus. The words weren't new, but they found the crack in my armor that day, seeping into my bones like the Nebraska winter chill. That evening, as I walked the back road to the farm, the weight of displacement nearly brought me to my knees. I found myself at the edge of a small pond, watching my reflection fragment in the ripples. Who was I becoming? A ghost invisible except for my labor? A body without a story? It was there that Joe Harmon found me, an elderly man with a cane in one hand and a fishing pole in the other. He didn't ask why I was sitting alone as dusk gathered. He simply sat beside me, his silence a kind of permission. "Fish aren't biting today," he finally said, his voice gravelly from years of smoking. "Tomorrow might be different." It was an ordinary comment that somehow anchored me. Tomorrow might be different. Joe, I would learn, had taught English at the high school for 40 years before retirement. His small house at the edge of town held more books than the local library. When he discovered I'd been educated through high school in Mexico, his eyes lit up. "The mind is the one place they can't put fences," he told me, pressing a copy of Steinbeck's The Pearl into my hands the following week. "Come by Tuesdays if you want to talk about it." Those Tuesday evenings became islands of dignity in a sea of invisibility. Joe never treated me like a charity case. He argued with me about Hemingway, challenged my interpretations of Marquez, and eventually convinced me to take night classes at the community college 30 miles away. Between one harvest and the next, he handed me a biography of Amedeo Giannini, the Italian immigrant who founded Bank of America from a single desk serving other immigrants refused by established banks. "He saw value where others saw only differences," Joe said simply. The book's pages became dog-eared as I read it between shifts. Giannini's story whispered possibilities I'd been afraid to name. I began to see my outsider status not as a burden but as perspective, a different way of looking at the world that might, perhaps, be valuable. The idea for Raul's Salsa came during a church potluck where I'd brought my grandmother's recipe more out of homesickness than anything else. The jar emptied while dishes of casserole remained untouched. Mrs. Peterson, surprising me with her first direct comment in 2 years, said, "This tastes like sunshine." With $50 saved from my wages, I bought mason jars and ingredients. The first batch was made in the farm kitchen during my off hours, Mrs. Peterson silently making space for me at the counter. I gave away more jars than I sold that first month, leaving them at doorsteps with handwritten labels. The town's resistance softened jar by jar. Mr. Wilkins from the corner store, who had barely spoken 10 words to me in 2 years, awkwardly asked if he could stock a few jars. The diner started serving it with their eggs. By summer's end, I had enough orders to rent a small commercial kitchen 1 town over. The path wasn't straight. The health inspector seemed to find a new violation every month. The bank denied my first loan application with barely a glance. A late frost killed my pepper crop. But each setback now felt like a problem to solve rather than a sign to surrender. Joe became my unofficial business advisor, helping me decipher legal forms and navigate permit applications. "They're just words," he'd say when I'd stare at government paperwork in despair. "And you've conquered harder things than words." 3 years in, Raul's Salsa had grown enough that I hired Maria, another immigrant from Guatemala, to help with production. 5 years in, we were in 17 stores across 3 counties. When the Peterson farm came up for sale after Mr. Peterson's stroke, I found myself sitting across from a loan officer who had once refused to meet my eyes, now eager to help with financing. The day I signed the papers for the farm, I drove out to the cemetery where Joe had been laid to rest the previous winter. I placed a jar of salsa and a copy of the Pearl against his headstone. "I think I finally understand what Steinbeck meant about the pearl being both treasure and curse," I said to the quiet air. "Our dreams can destroy us if we let them become more important than who we are." Today, 15 years after I arrived in Fairhaven with nothing, I employ 27 people, immigrants and locals alike. My mother lives in the renovated farmhouse, her garden a riot of flowers and herbs that find their way into our newest products. The chicken coop where I once slept has been converted into a reading room filled with books, open to anyone in town. Each summer, I teach a business class at the community college. I tell my students, many of them children of the people who once avoided my gaze, that success isn't about escaping who you are. It's about becoming more fully yourself. Self-doubt still visits me sometimes, especially on dark winter mornings when the wind howls across the plains. But now I recognize it as an old companion rather than an enemy, a voice that asks the hard questions that keep me honest. I am still an immigrant. I am still a dreamer. I am still a survivor. But I am also a neighbor, an employer, a teacher, and a friend in a community that has become home not because it welcomed me at first, but because we learned to see each other's humanity across the divide of difference. My grandmother's words remain with me. Remember who you are when the world tries to tell you different. What I've learned is that who we are is never fixed. It's what we become in the face of doubt, in the spaces between what was and what could be, in the courage to plant seeds in soil that may not want you, but needs what only you can grow. I am Raul Mendoza, and this is not just my story. It's a story about the ground we share, the harvests we reap together, and the possibility that tomorrow might be different, if we have the courage to believe it could be.